Okay, so thank you all for coming to this session on a regenerative transition. I'm Abby Rose. I am co-founder of VitaCycle. We make the Soil Mentor app, which you'll hear a bit about in a second. And I also help make the podcast Farmerama. I'm sharing the voices of the regenerative movement, essentially. And I see some faces I know here and some new faces, so welcome all. It's great to see you. Today we've got Clare here from FAI Farms, who is going to take us on some of her journey of transitioning to regenerative farming over the last 2 years. And then we also have Caroline. Sorry, she's on the other end of the speaker, Caroline Grindrod.
I am here.
Yeah, hello. So she wasn't not able to be here today, but we'll be hearing from Caroline in a second, but Caroline has really worked with Clare on this regenerative transition as some may call it consultant, but I think Caroline would rather call it coach, really helping Clare move quickly through the transition. And so today we're really going to focus on what does that transition look like? What are the barriers? What are the frustrations? And what does it really mean to do the mindset shift of regenerative? Because I think that's something we don't really talk about enough. Like mentally, what happens? So we're really going to focus on some of that side of things today. So first, I was just going to say a little bit about what Soil Mentor is. So Soil Mentor is a tool that Caroline and Clare used as part of their transition. And it's an app that we've created that allows you to really record your observations as you go out in the field. So it's very much about like you going and looking at the soil and making observations, recording them, and then learning from them. And then when you go back to the same place, maybe a few months, maybe a year later, you can then see what's changed and then make decisions based off the changes. And really that's at the core of what regenerative is about. So if you want to find out more about Soil Mentor at the end, you can come find us. We've got some cards with our website and everything on it. So now I'm going to hand over to Clare to just shortly give a bit of an intro about yourself, and then I'll ask Caroline to do the same.
Okay, thanks Abby, this is working. I take care of 1,200 acres in Oxfordshire. I'm part of FAI Farms, and we work with large food brands on helping them improve their supply chains, I guess. And historically that's been focused on animal welfare and sustainability, but now we know that sustainability is no longer enough because we haven't achieved it, and even if we did achieve it now, we've still got more to do. So now my role would be focused on regeneration, and that's regeneration of our farm, and then working with the clients that I work with on regeneration within their supply chain. And that would be, I would work, just to give you some examples, McDonald's, Arla, IKEA, Marks and Spencer's, those would be the types of companies I'm talking about. And my role sits across both things, so I oversee the running of the farm and I work on their strategies. And that is a really unique position that means that I can take our learnings from the farm and what it means to be farming and now farming regeneratively and help them understand what changes that need to be made for their businesses in order to do the right thing. And over the it started off about 5 years ago when we decided we needed to remove grain from our ruminant diets. And then since then it kind of snowballed and snowballed until 2 years ago we said, right, we're going to do this regen thing. We've been organic for 20 years. And we kind of thought if we're organic, we're like at the top of the tree. You can't get any better for the environment than what we're doing. But we started hearing more about what's happening in the States, etc., on regen and thought, well, can this work in the UK? Can we do adaptive multi-paddock grazing or holistic plant grazing at scale in the UK? And that's what we set out to do. So I'll share a bit more about that later. That's me.
Great, thank you. Caroline, can you please share a bit about yourself?
Sure. So, hi everybody, I'm really sorry I can't be with you. Circumstances were just not very favourable. But yeah, I suppose it's quite difficult explaining who I am and what I do because it's always evolving. But I think that I'm a consultant and coach in regenerative agriculture primarily through my consultancy Roots of Nature Limited. And that kind of acts as an umbrella for my other areas of work, and I have a few threads. One is I was the founder and I'm now the co-director of Primal Meats, the 100% grass-fed meat company. And I was a co-founder along with Alex Tomlinson and my husband Stephen of Wilderculture, community interest company. And I'm now a co-director alongside Sam Beaumont as well. So we are collectively exploring what regenerative could look like in the uplands, and that's in various project-based sort of scenarios and research and in many different ways. So that's an exciting project that's growing quickly. And then so as Claire said, basically and Abby, that I kind of started to think of myself more as a coach. So very much do work direct with farmers, but it's more in a kind of a project-based long-term relationship rather than a consultant that goes around just giving advice and sort of leaving it there. So I think that's something that's evolved since I started working in Regen, is that we realised that there's a bigger, this mindset shift that we've already mentioned is a big focus, and actually I think what's needed in this space is somebody that can support and guide and on a sort of more ongoing basis in a deeper way. So that's kind of how things are emerging for me.
Great. Thank you, Caroline. So I guess we wanted to start with, where did they start? So like what, maybe you could share a little bit about what were the first steps that, how did you get started on this journey together? What did that look like?
So the first thing we did...
Claire, do you want to start?
Or yeah, sorry, I already started, Caroline. Typical. I think the first thing we did was split a field in four. Everyone told us we wouldn't be able to keep our cattle in electric fencing, and so we spent some money on some permanent electric fencing just to try it, and actually it was fine, and we grew a bit more grass. And then it evolved where the real turning point was somebody within our business arranged a 2-day training with Caroline on regenerative agriculture, and I was really heavily pregnant at the time, but I went along and tried to concentrate as much as I could, and that was where that kind of like immersive thing started. It's more than just taking grain out of the diet. This is like a total rethink of the way we do things. So I think that's where it kind of kick-started for me. And then I came back from maternity leave and we did it on the farm. Yeah.
Got it. And Caroline, from your perspective, because obviously you've worked with many different people in this way, what's usually the starting point from your perspective?
So it's super interesting, and I think it really depends a little bit on the way that the path that you came, to regenerative agriculture, and of course there's many people have read lots of books and immersed themselves in YouTube, and depending on how far down that path that you are and your own journey will depend on what where you get with that, I suppose. But I think there's no substitute for a kind of immersive period of training, and ideally being around other people going through the same process. I think that's hugely transformative and helps to make that kind of psychological shift that has to happen. And I think it's a cliche a little bit that this stuff is operating in a different paradigm, but it's very, very true. And in order to help that shift, being able to look at things holistically and from that different perspective, then I do think that kind of a 2 or 3 day minimum immersion in the subject matter on ideally in a place that you can kind of put that into context and go out onto the field and see those sort of concepts in action is hugely helpful. And then often what tends to happen, I find, is there's a period I think of that as a kind of brain scrambling exercise, which most people go in sort of looking quite in pain at the end of it. And it's not a comfortable place to be, because essentially you're sort of realising that everything that you thought you knew that you were holding on to may not be true to some degree. That is the case. And that then it's a process of sort of going away, and I believe it's a great thing to go away and sort of use your own farmland, use examples, verges, anything you can from kind of nature, I suppose, just like natural ecology. I think verges are great because they're one of the few places who've still got really healthy soil and functional ecosystem processes. So if you go away and sort of take those principles that you've learned in that immersive experience and then see in action in other places, it kind of reconfirms what you've learned yourself, which is the most powerful way of learning. And that can take sometimes years. So sometimes people will get trained, you expect them to go away. Other times people will get, like Claire got it straight away because she was a long way down that journey already. And it was just sort of clicking into place the last few pieces. But other people will go away for quite a long period of time and then start to sort of confirm those concepts to themselves and those principles. And like Claire suggested, actually, I'm a big fan of going and experimenting on your own farm, little areas, fencing them out, grazing them differently, just having little plots here and there to see what happens when we rest, double period, or we graze, and then just playing around with lots of tools on your own landscape is a hugely powerful thing. So I think that for me is what I would call the most effective first steps.
Yeah, and I think when we were talking about this before, you guys both talked about the importance of those initial failures in that learning journey. Yeah, I don't know, Claire, you brought that up. Do you have anything more to say about that?
Yeah, I don't know if anything's actually failed. We've tried things, and I think that is right, that experimenting. So for us, we split that first field in 4. We try, like this year, probably what I will say is a failure, and maybe it's going to be a failure, is we've tried direct drilling. So we're sort of into a grass sward. We tried to do a bit of destruction with a power harrow a little bit, and then planted a polyculture mix of grain, which I don't think is going to work. So that's one of our failures. But we only did it on a small area, and definitely that experimenting. So to start with, we were all worried about putting all the sheep in one group. So if we're going to have the rest periods that we need to reduce the number of groups that we've got on the farm, and it was a big discussion in the farm team about how would that work, how we manage it, what about having so many sheep in one group. And so I guess we grouped up 2 groups together, and then we grouped up 3, and now we're at the point where we just got 2 groups of animals, 1 cattle, 1 sheep. So it definitely, and that allowed us to extend our rest periods. And another would be that we had a field that good grass growing time of year. The grass got away from us. Of course, classic would be, let's go and cut it, top it, bale it, whatever we're going to do. And we said, what if we just left it? Let's just leave it with really long grass and see what happens. And now that field, we left that for 12 months actually in the end. And that field is now one of our best fields. And that period of rest really kick-started us. And that allowed us to see then the benefit of rest. Because previous to that, we've been in that mindset of maximise utilisation. If you leave anything behind, you're wasting it. How can we kind of push the throttle on that? So just a bit of experimentation, but nothing actually feels like a failure. So I don't think there's been any failures. I can see Peter, who used to work for us in the audience here. He might remember differently, but
and I think that's just a great example of Claire getting this concept of that there's not really any such thing as failure. It's just feedback, and I'm a big fan of just getting to market with this stuff. Just try something, and then it's not until you're in motion that you get that feedback, or you might call it a failure sometimes, but essentially it's just information that's then making your next decision more informed and better, and hopefully more successful. So and that's really just in line with your context. Again, we'll come on to context, but until you've got a clear idea of what you're trying to achieve and why, how do you know whether you're succeeding or failing? So that's a huge part of this, is understanding very clearly what you're trying to achieve. But yeah, I'm a big fan of just getting something in motion and then learning from it and constantly just tweaking, evolving, and then I call it ready, fire, aim. You basically fire arrow, see where it goes, what can you do next time better to make that closer to the target, and then you just keep doing that kind of forever.
Great. Yeah, I love that visual. The endless firing closer to the target.
Endless firing arrows.
And you kind of hinted at this then, Caroline, but okay, you've made your start. You've started to do these experiments, and then what? Like, how do you start to make decisions of what is right and what's not helping, and where are you going to go? There's lots of different things coming back at you. Like, yeah, what are the tools you guys use at that point?
So I kind of might lineage to regenerative agriculture from holistic management. And although I kind of have a lot of different things that I sort of bring to the table and use in management, that the framework of holistic management is kind of a big influence in how it kind of underpins most of of what I do. So there'll be lots of themes that people will recognise that are familiar with holistic management. But essentially, I am a firm believer that until you've got a clear context, as we call it, this clear vision of your kind of how you're going to operate and what your future looks like on the farm for yourself, your money, bringing in that bottom line, it's the idea of that, then you can't know what is a good decision and what is a bad decision. You can't. So many people start this journey and they think, and there's nothing wrong with this. It's just a bit limiting. Is that you think we've got this general notion of I want to be regenerative. So, but what does that really mean for you? And I think sometimes the work isn't done in really sort of understanding and clarifying that, which is work I manage. So I kind of sometimes use the analogy of if you were intending, if you're a builder and you're setting off to build a hotel, how can you instruct the builders? How can you know what the footprint of the building is going to look like? How can you know what size the rooms are? How can you hire staff or order curtains or decide on the bathroom suite until you've decided if it's a posh boutique hotel that's catering for people with lots of money, or if it's a kind of bargain basement bunk barn. You can't make those decisions until you've got that clear vision of what ultimately you're trying to achieve for yourself in that on the farm. So I think that's the first step for me, and that's part of our 3-day immersion, is very much getting clarity. And you don't have to decide there, but you're given the tools and you're given the thinking to go away and understand what are my values. And of course, no farmer really wants to sort of start to think about this. It's the stuff that nobody wants to have to think about. They just want to get busy with some practices and all of that stuff. And I get that, but unless you do start to think about, what are my values, what's going to kind of ultimately make me happy, we really don't know if we're making good decisions or not. So having a feel for what's going to be right for my family, what sort of money do I need to make here, what's going to keep us feeling secure or be able to save for the future, and then what's the landscape that I want to create here, not just short term but long into the future. Really down to quite a lot of detail. I mean, we do sort of almost, vision board kind of exercises where you're literally sort of picking and choosing habitats that you like, or looking at your infrastructure and seeing what would allow, what habitat to be where, and which farming operations do we want to have, and does it involve a farm shop or selling direct, and all of that stuff, gets some real clarity around that. And it's still very flexible within that, but until you've got that kind of nailed down, it's pretty hard making decisions. And then of course, to layer onto that, we then sort of teach a decision making framework. Holistic management has one way of doing it. I have a slightly different version that I use. But ultimately what I tend to do is this sort of coaching that we've talked about, where I'm regularly checking in with the team that are kind of in transition, and I kind of act as a bit of a coach, helping them go through those decisions. So it might not be working our way through a sheet, but I'm sort of questioning, every decision as it comes along. Is this right for what you want? Is this going to help you, become economically viable? Is this going to create the landscape that you've said you wanted to create? Is this going to work for your family and yourself on the farm in practical terms? So those are the sorts of things that we start to question. So it's really about getting clear, understanding that the training helps you understand the principles, and the sort of ecological principles that underpin this stuff. Then you've got to create the vision of what you want to achieve on the farm. Then you've got to basically just get busy saying, right, let's move forward. What's the next decision? Is that moving me towards that context? And then getting feedback on that decision to say, how has that worked out? What can I learn from this? And then you start to build an idea of, okay, what practices you might apply to your farm. And often people dive straight into the practices. They just think, I'm going to go and copy that, I'm going to go and plant a herbal layer, I'm going to go and do this because other regenerative people are doing it, but that might not be right for your context. So that's the way around that we do things.
Yeah, and Claire, so what did that look like for you on your farm?
Yeah, that's all the way through. I'm thinking that exactly. So what that looked like for me to start with was, I don't want to do all that, Caroline. Can't you just tell me how many animals, how big do I make the cells? I just want to get on with it. And we went through that for a few months, really, of that frustration of, I don't really want to do all this stuff, because it's hard, it hurts your head, it's a different way of thinking. But eventually she said, really, you just got to sit down and do it. So I did this holistic context where, and of course, I've never sat down and thought about what do we want to achieve as a farm where me and my family live, and as a farm that's part of a bigger business that has other things to do. So we have things we need to deliver for those clients, but we have things that we need to deliver for us as people living, and for the other people and families that are living on the farm, whether they are students on short-term things or their families that have moved to the farm, made their commitment, moved their children there, and actually that's quite a responsibility, because if they don't enjoy their job and they've got to move their family again elsewhere, like that's really disruptive for their life. And so started kind of actually then start to consider all these things, and at the same time there's a great farmer over in West Wales who I met, who really inspired me when he said he's not wasn't kind of coming at it from a regen angle, but he was saying, when I came back to the family farm and I wrote my business plan, I wrote into that business plan that I would have every other weekend off, and that I would only work so many hours a week, and I would have 2 weeks holiday every summer. And I have never heard any other farmer say that that's what their business plan is about. And so every decision that he makes on that farm is about, will that help him or hinder him to deliver those goals? And now he's even upped that one more by measuring his profitability on profitability or margin per hour worked. And those kind of things became really inspiring, because as an industry, if we did that, how would that look? Because, you know, we badge ourselves, don't we? It was a badge of pride. Oh, I worked 24 years without a day off. And we wear that with pride, and we're almost seen to be weak if we say, actually, I had a great 4 days off mid-harvest, wasn't it amazing? And it can't always be achieved, but that is a change in mindset in itself, to start to put those other things first, whatever they are, whatever they are for us. So I would kind of echo that. I didn't want to do it. I wanted to just get on, just want to get on. I just need to know what to do next. And but that taking that time to sit back, and our holistic context is only a page and a half long. It's not that long, but we use it, and we use it as a team, and we review it every year or every 6 months, and we say, is this still what we want to do? And then, you know, make some tweaks and change it. But that is, it's hard work up here, but it's definitely the thing that kickstarts a real change, because then every decision we make refers back to that.
Yeah, and it's funny, I'm so glad that you said how horrible it felt to do it, or how much you didn't want to do it, because when Caroline was talking about it just then, I was thinking like, oh yeah, I can see I don't want to do that either. Like, it does, it feels like, and also, I like also, Claire, that you review it every 6 months, because also I notice for me, I think like, oh, I don't want to be held accountable to that forever. You know, like, what if my ideas change, or, I don't know, there's a certain responsibility that comes with when you put these values down. Sorry, the robot is obviously having trouble. But yeah, I think having that, you know, making yourself put the values down and then working with it in a flexible way, that actually sounds like something I could possibly do. And having Caroline there to support you on that journey must have been invaluable, I guess, because...
Yeah, we definitely couldn't have done this without the people. So it's really interesting. It was also another thing is like, what do I need to buy? What bit of kit? What do I sell and buy something new? What thing do I need to help me make these steps? Should we go out and buy this electric fencer, or shall we get that? Should we trade all of our wrapper fencing in and get all of the Kiwi Tech stuff, because that looks really great? And actually what I've learned is that none of that stuff really matters, and it's about the people that are there, because it's about the learning new things. I always say we're still beef, sheep and laying hen farmers, and that's what we were 10 years ago on a kind of conventional organic system. Just the way we think about what we do has changed. And the only way to help us think differently is to get input from other people. So Caroline, James Daniel, Alex Tomlinson, they're my kind of, I guess, the team I have around me who have coached over these years in thinking in a different way. So that's been an interesting learning for me as well. It's about the people, not the stuff.
And so when we're, oh yeah, sorry, go on, Caroline.
Sorry, I would just add is that, you know, everyone, a lot of people are focusing on, you know, the detail of, you know, how do you get the best grazing plan? You get the best grazing plan in the world put together, you know, that's based on the best science that's going to optimise your production and all the rest of it. And the thing that they're missing is the fact that, you know, as soon as you get busy with that, it's completely impractical. It falls to pieces every year, and within the first month, it's all gone to pot because you've not properly thought through the kind of social implications of how does, will it actually work? Is it practical? Can I actually manage this within my life? That happens so often, and that's the kind of the social piece that's missed. Is that, as I say, it's the quickest way to get inefficient in your grazing plan, because it's essentially, it just fails straight away. So every year you go back and you just think, I'll double down on understanding the plant science. I'll learn more about soil science. I'll kind of dive deep into this subject, and then still don't want to look at the social aspects of, actually, can I make this work? Is it even possible? And I think you probably found that in the early days as well. It's we are all very much sort of inspired by these brilliant regen people that are doing stacked enterprises and multiple different things, and they're making it work, and it's brilliant. But we kind of forget that that's taken them probably 10, 20 years to get there, at learning their own system and evolving it as they go. And we dive in and make things so complicated that they fall on their ass, basically. And then that's a very good way not to make things work too. So yeah, I would just sort of say that we need to start paying more attention to the social weak link, which is where I think it feels in most of the projects I'm working with. That's where the biggest challenges are.
And something we don't talk about that much, I think, is like how do we get people, in the farm team on board, and what's your support network that's going to mean that when it looks really dire, that actually someone's going to help you come back from that and feel good about yourself, and work through these problems together, because no one's going to be able to do this on their own, and it sometimes does look really daunting and frustrating. I know that was your favorite word. And so it is that, it sounds like the connection and the people really has made a big difference. But also, when we were talking, you did come up with a few little tools that I think you mentioned, like the red flag training, and Claire, you talked a little bit about thinking about root cause. That those were ways that really help you to make your decisions in the moment, and those are tools you've built up.
Yeah, I think. Just to dip back on the social side, the first bit that I knew that we needed to think about that was when we got a letter from our landlord to say that we were in breach of our tenancy because we weren't keeping the land in good agricultural order, because we'd let the grass grow too long and we hadn't topped the fields, basically. I was like, oh wow, okay. And then that followed some complaints from our neighbours about the messy state, and they thought we were letting the place go to pot. So that really taught me a bit about the social side, and luckily once I explained what we were doing, they got on board and that was fine. But there's been another important part in that we've had to rebuild another network, get a new support system. So basically making friends with other people doing similar things, because if I went to my traditional farming friends or our neighbours and said, oh, what do you think about this? They'd be like, you're crazy, you're doing the wrong thing, it's a mess, it's a disaster. So just that's a little bit about building networks, I guess, is what you've got to get new friends. I still see the other ones socially, but I just don't talk about farming with them anymore. Then to your actual point that you wanted me to make now about where we've been lucky, we've been through this programme of training, and it's not just me that's done the training. The farm team they've done all that training, we've done it all together. It's not about me learning it and then telling them what to do, it's about them going on their own individual journey. And it's been really interesting to watch them do that, and everybody's gone at different paces. So they'll sort of be like, oh yeah, and then they'll get a bit of, go and see something else and get a bit nervous, and we have this up and down, and nobody's ever at the same place on the journey at the same time. It's really interesting just watching that and experiencing my own journey as well. But where it really suddenly everybody came together and went, I get it, was when we started to understand about root causes. So our modus operandi before would have been, we've got thistles, let's go top them. Now it's, we've got thistles, why have we got thistles? What successional state are we at? What are we going to do to manage the land differently to mean that the thistles don't come back? Or do we want the thistles? Why are they coming? And going where we've done that, where we had in our first year of regen, of course we thought, yeah, we're doing this great, we're going to have this amazing system. And we got the worst New Forest eye we've ever had on the farm during bulling time. So young calves at foot, we're bringing that whole herd, the group in that had it every day, pulling out more and more cows and calves. Then we're going to have to find another bull to put them to the bull, because we want to separate them and we want to do all the right things. So we were like, how has this happened? Because we're treating them with antibiotics, doing the right thing. But then we started, because of our knowledge and understanding that we've done with Alex and Caroline on, we just keep going down at why. Root cause is something, it's used in health and safety if anyone's done health and safety training. It's the same thing. Why? Keep going back. So So why have we got New Forest Eye? Because we've got flies. Whereas normally we just stop it there. Let's just put another dose of whatever the fly swish on, and that'll deal with it, and then we'll hope we don't get as many flies next year. Why have we got loads of flies? Well, because they're all hatching. Where do they hatch? They hatch in the dung. Why are they hatching in the dung? Because we've got dung. Well, what can we do to get rid of the dung? Well, actually, if our dung beetle population and our soil biology was better, our dung would disappear more quickly, and if we could get our dung going away more quickly, we wouldn't get flies hatching. Okay, so why don't we have dung beetles? Well, because or good soil biology? Well, because actually our sheep are really super woolly, and like everybody's sheep, the way we manage them in the UK, we use fly treatments. We're very proactive, because we don't really get fly strike, but we would be using lots of click and preventative treatments, and of course we're worming the sheep. So, okay, actually, what's happening is that our sheep treatments are the thing that are causing our New Forest Eye and in our cattle, and I've never thought about that before. And then when you start doing that, it's really interesting. And everybody, the same with, we had a similar example. We've got, every time we bring animals in the shed, we get lice. And we've got a really old, we're on a tenant farm, and it's a really old dairy farm. And we've got sleepers running up the sides of the shed, which means that all sorts of critters are getting in there. And it's great, isn't it brilliant, when you bring people who aren't from a farming background in, and they're like, why do we have to treat the animals with this stuff? And Humphrey was working with us at the time. He's like, yeah, because we bring the animals inside and they get lice. And he's like, so why don't we just keep the animals outside? They wouldn't get lice. And he's like, he said it just stopped and kind of put the thing down and went, I don't know, this is crazy. Like, why are we doing this? So, of course, we have to do those things in the moment and continue with the treatments, but just those sorts of questions start to come out that make us think about doing things differently. Sorry, that was a long speech.
No, great. I mean, Caroline, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I suppose just to frame the kind of training that underpins what Claire's beautifully articulated is that Alex particularly sort of led on this, but we've kind of co-developed this concept of red flag training within viticulture, and I guess for those familiar with holistic management, it's kind of the weak link kind of element of the biological and the community dynamics, but essentially it's kind of a deepening of that. And what we do is we say it's a great way to train your mind actually to think differently, and if you're getting a problem in your management, we call that a red flag species. It's not necessarily a bad species, it's causing us a problem, and that usually indicates there's an imbalance in the kind of ecology of the farms, actually. So what we then do is we kind of look at that species, and in ecology we always look at basically an organism turns up when you create the life conditions it likes. So in very simple terms, it relies on resources, and then it's regulated from the top and the side, I suppose, from, it's predated, and then it's got competition. So those are the things that kind of keep an organism in its place. And if you've got very low succession, so you're, you've sort of degraded your soil and you're more at the low successional stage, then you get more of a booming and busting in populations. So these populations become dominant and are more problematic. And as you go advanced succession, they have more diversity, complexity, and connectedness, then they're less of a problem. But within that, you're sort of saying, well, any species requires certain conditions. Now, you've got some species, like generalist species, that are a bit more able to cross barriers, but ultimately they won't live unless you create the food and the shelter and the breeding conditions that they like. And that you've at least regulated to some degree how much predation they're getting and how much competition they're getting. So what we then say is, okay, well, what have you done in your management that's created the conditions that this species is loving? Whether it's thistle or dock or flies or anything, any problem species that fluke, take, anything. You look at the individual organism and you say, okay, what does it need to survive and thrive, and how have we created more of that? And then what have we done to damage the things that are regulating it in terms of predation and competition? And you do kind of an assessment and analysis, and Alex is, brilliant at putting together that thinking. And then we sort of train that in the team to think that process through. And as Claire said, keep asking why, relentlessly until you get to the bottom of the problem. And sometimes it's incredibly surprising what you find. And that's a brilliant way of fostering and training this kind of psychological shift, this paradigm shift that we need to start thinking of things differently. So it's way beyond this idea of, oh, we've got a problem species like a thistle, what's the least toxic way we can spray that thistle, or how do we get rid of it? It's completely reframing it and saying, what's that thistle telling us? What why we got it? It's not inherently bad. So if we've got a lot of it, what we do to create that situation, and how do we then uncreate to reverse the management that's created that situation? What do we do differently? And often that will look like advancing succession and getting more complexity, diversity, and connectance through different habitats and better soil health and more diversity in the swards. That will then sort of balance itself out, and ultimately that's kind of usually what we're trying to get to. But in the meantime, of course, sometimes you have to have a holding action of treating that issue. But the main thing is that holding action shouldn't really be undermining the efforts to change the cause of the issue in the first place. And you should always be taking action in your management to be making sure that thing doesn't just keep coming back. And if it keeps coming back, then you've not addressed the root cause of the problem.
Yeah, and I really like that. You come and you see a problem, and then it's almost like it becomes this web or a system in itself, and the problem's at the center, and you're like looking at all the things around that are connected, and how do they connect into all the other decisions you're making in the farm. And I guess it escalates quite quickly. But
yeah. And then another way of framing that is ultimately it's very difficult to know what truly natural systems look like because we've got so few of them in the world. But ultimately you would be saying, why isn't this problem happening in a natural system? Why wouldn't it be happening in a natural system? What's the difference? Are they, and then that's another way of sort of drilling into the problem. But these are great tools for. And ultimately, everybody comes across problems, and new first eye is very common in the first couple of years of transitioning, and so they're just great teachers. This feedback thing, isn't it? It's not failure. It's just what's it telling us? How does that help us our thinking shift, and then how do we evolve our system? Yeah, useful stuff.
And then, so core to this, obviously, is that observation and the looking all the time, looking, so that you can get that feedback, so you can then learn and then look again. So maybe, is it fair to say that prioritizing observation is like a really key part of the regenerative transition?
Yeah, I think it is. Humphrey says on the farm where he'll say it sounds cheesy, but when you start looking at things differently, the things you look at change, and I think that sums it up really well. I think it started for us, so one of my key defining moments was doing a water infiltration test with Soil Mentor, I should say. So doing their tests, and we did a number of them across the farm, and we'd had the wettest winter on record, because it always is these days, and the dry spring, because it always is, and we'd been underwater for months, and then it was lambing time, and there were cracks in the ground, and I was like, where's all the water gone? And then we did the infiltration tests, and we had some were really good, and some were like over an hour. In fact, when we did some other ones later in the year, we had 8 hours it took for 450 ml of water to go down through a piece of sewage pipe into our land. And I was like, oh, that's where the water goes. It doesn't even go into the soil, it just runs straight off. That's where our water goes. And so now I don't necessarily go out every 5 minutes doing more infiltration tests, but what I do is when I'm out walking about, I'm looking down. What can I see? What's different? Oh, that's interesting. The water's really lying low in there. What's causing that? And you just start to become. I don't think I've intentionally become more observant. I just do, because that feedback. That's where I need to get my information from. I don't need to ring up my feedback and say, oh, this is happening. Am I growing for it to this? What do you think I should feed differently? I need to look at what's happening on the land and around me and get feedback from that to know what's happening differently to help make different decisions.
Yeah, and I love when you told me about the infiltration rate thing as well. You said, that's my productivity. Like, it's not putting more stuff on. It's actually like, if I get more water in the ground, I'll have 3 months more grazing.
Yeah, we're a farm that would traditionally always describe as we're wet in the winter and dry in the summer. We go from up under the Whiting Woods down onto the floodplain of the Thames. We mapped the farm this winter, so 50% of our farm goes underwater every winter. With that, we just accepted that we burn off in the summer. But what does that really even mean? It just means we're not holding on to the water. So yeah, that's my productivity now. It's not. We used to focus on earlier and earlier calving and lambing to get animals finished and away as quickly as possible while the prices were still good. That was our productivity. Now it's like, well, if I can hold on to that water and keep that in the ground through the summer, and I keep growing grass through the summer, and I keep my soil covered with lots of trampled material, warmer in the winter, cooler in the summer, that's where I'm going to grow more, that's my productivity. So we talk now about redefining our productivity. Like, what do we even mean when people say to me, well, I bet you're not as productive anymore? I'm like, well, what do we even mean by that? Our margin is better, everyone's less stressed, our animals are healthier, we have less cost, and although we're not making a gazillion pounds, we're maybe not losing the money that we were on sheep previously, and we're kind of feel like making progress, and it feels hopeful. That's the other thing. I think definitely felt like we were on this treadmill before of like, oh, next spring it'll be better, next winter can't be as wet as that one, and it'll all be okay then. It's like, actually this spring has been one of the worst springs on record for different reasons, and because we made a decision that we were going to make our calving and lambing later, so in May, we didn't have any of those highs and lows in early spring. We were just, while everyone else was stressing out about not having any grass, it being too cold, lambs struggling, etc., we were just like, right, we'll sit back because we know we'll get grass by May. There's never been a year where we haven't had what we've needed by May. And also it helps with that recovery, so coming out of the spring and actually getting some really long growth. And I've noticed that we're now growing, I don't know how many, we'll have to measure it, but last year all of our grass was going to seed at this height because that's where we've always grazed it to, so we've trained it that it's going to go to seed and reproduce, it's got to go to seed pretty quick because we're constantly grazing. All it's taken is 12 months of extended rest periods, so between 3 and 6 months. For this spring, the stuff is up and over my head in places. So we are just growing so much more. So there's more for them to eat, there's more to be trampled back into the ground, and kind of more for everyone to go round. And so, yeah, that's that kind of, our productivity parameters have changed in our head. I should just say, because people will be interested, our average daily live weight gain is 1.4 kilos from birth to death. This year, we'll finish our first animals in 16 months. Purely on a grazing system like that, and I would imagine everything would be away by 20 months at the latest, and we see opportunity to improve that year on year. So if we think the average beef animals average is 24 months in the UK, age of slaughter, then we're going to be looking at like an average, I'd like to think we're an average of 19 months fairly soon. So that's productivity right there, with no grain, no nothing. So we're matching the daily live weight gains of the best finishers in the UK on fairly intensive systems. No buildings, no nothing needed. Just a bit of electric fence and a bit of a mindset shift.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Brilliant. And I would, Clare and I riff on this concept of redefining productivity quite a lot, and I love it. And we get focused on the exact timing of when to graze grass, and we kind of focus in on carbon sequestration and what species is the most productive, and we miss this big picture of actually you've missed 3 months growth because you've had you had this sort of soil bare to the air and the sun, and then the animals are not optimal because they're not ruminating, because they're stressed, or they're in the sun in the middle of the paddock, or they've got no shelter, they're not allowed to use have natural behaviour, or they're in the flies, or there's all these other factors that dictate productivity. And again, bricks, there's lots of science coming out now about the more complex the sward, the higher the bricks, the less dry matter you need. So focusing on just volume and dry matter is missing some important pieces of the puzzle as well. Actually, if you get nutrient density in because you've allowed for those longer rest periods, okay, you might look at that sward and think it's a bit lignified and it's not in its most productive form, but the benefits of shifting succession, because you're adding fungi to the soil, and then, as Claire said, keeping it covered and moist and productive throughout the season, and getting into those shorter seasons is far outweighs the kind of trying to graze at this optimal perfect vegetative state or whatever. There's so many different ways of thinking about it. So again, we just sort of try and always widen out the thinking and say, what's the big picture, what we're trying to achieve? Are the animals healthy? Are they happy? Are they able to ruminate? Are they able to get the nutrient density and the diversity that they need? Is it right for that species, the breed of animal that we've got? Have we got the simplest system to make it work so that it doesn't fall down and you end up just going back to stop grazing? Have we factored in all those social considerations? All of that builds this overall productivity, which is what we're really trying to achieve. Now, the problem is that that isn't particularly attractive to people that are just trying to jump in and learn it. It's very kind of woo-woo and wide-angled, but that's where I believe the biggest gains can be made. And again, so often people are just sort of doubling down on the, okay, we just need to improve our soil health and sequester more carbon or get the right species. But, actually, I think it's this, this wider approach that's so important. And really that's about, observation, back to the original question, this is about you getting to know your land, your needs, your animals' needs, understanding what works on your situation. So as a consultant, I would be wrong to, I believe anyway, to go and try and tell somebody what to do. That's a very conventional way of doing things, but I've learned that actually the most important thing is teaching them the principles so that they can then go and apply them to their farm. And then my job is just to simply support and question and try and foster the way of thinking that's going to allow them to be successful on their farm. And then they can decide on the practices and which fields they're going to put into which species, because they've kind of fully understand. I can't be the expert of that farm. They've been there for years, and will continue to be. So, me spending a day on a farm and then giving them some sort of prescriptive plan is absurd, really. And if you look back to the people that were the best guardians of the land for the longest time, it's our sort of the kind of native peoples and these traditional cultures who were just they didn't have science. Science is brilliant, and happily it's now backing up a lot of what we thought and are talking about in regen. That's brilliant. I'm not anti-science by any means, but it should be complementing what we're learning ourselves and observing, not sort of influencing, because science is always going to be a partial picture, a partial piece of a bigger puzzle, a bigger picture. So the science is never decided and complete and finished. Science in itself is always going to be emerging and evolving and learning new things. So we shouldn't make all our decisions based on the newest science. We should be just thinking, okay, yeah, that's great, that backs up what I was thinking, brilliant. But what have I learned myself on my land with that feedback? I think that's something I'm really keen on.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because in a way with Soil Mentor, that is also what we're trying to do, is like give you the tools to support your decision making and your observations. And I think, well, I know Caroline, you use it with different clients for that reason. We're trying to always empower people to make decisions for themselves.
Absolutely, and this, as I say, science is great, and you can get somebody in to come and do soil chemistry and. You can do all of these things, people can come in and do things and tell you, give you analysis. That's great, and it's got its place, and we use that in certain situations, particularly where, there's problems. But I think I love Soil Mentor because it's a practical, easy, affordable tool, and the most important thing is it gets people on the farm, the farmers themselves, looking at the land, getting on their knees, digging holes, exploring, smelling, observing, and then logging it, so you've got something useful that's then a benchmark too. So for me, it's definitely the tool of choice because of that, and anything else is great and nice to have. But ultimately, as I said, back to the people that were the best custodians of our land didn't have these scientific tools. It's great, but this the cost to them, and sometimes it can lead us in the wrong direction. So Soil Mentor is brilliant because it is fostering that relationship with the land.
I'm just conscious we haven't let you guys speak at all yet. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Oh yeah, okay. Right, great. Go for it.
Where do you see the convergence between your regen practice and your organic practice? Have you abandoned organic? Or are you still organic?
Yeah, so in case everyone didn't hear the question, that was just, are we still organic and how have we merged the two sets of practices? Yeah, we're definitely still organic because there's nothing that we do now that doesn't fit with an organic system, and so we might as well get the premium. And also just to support that kind of movement of good food, something organic is something that's accessible for people to buy when regen food is not necessarily available very easily. And I would say that how those things have come together is that, in a way, maybe it's because the organic standards are a set of rules, and so there's something that we stick to, and we kind of thought if we were sticking to those rules we were doing everything we needed to do. But we definitely observed that our we didn't feel like our soils were alive. They didn't feel very alive. We didn't really know how to describe that. And so we had no chemicals. And I think that's one of the reasons that our land has responded so well, like why we've got grass from here to here in just 12 months, is because we haven't had that reliance on chemicals, and our land hasn't had to go through this kind of detox that I heard others talking about yesterday, like crop failures, because they did too much too quickly. But there's this, it kind of goes beyond that. So we just thought, well, it's no chemicals, we're doing organic, and that was great, and we passed our thing, but we didn't understand all the relationships between all these different things that we were doing, and building our root depth deeper, and getting our carbon down in it, because we kind of assume we've got livestock, so we're doing everything we need to do. But actually we'd overgrazed the farm for 20 years, not really knowing what overgraze meant before, but and that's what we've done. So it kind of goes beyond that, but yeah, organic would still be the foundation of what we do, and we're actually we've got all the certifications. We're going through PFLA at the moment because there's real demand for our meat. We're getting inquiries all the time, so it seems crazy that we're selling ours organic into the supermarkets. We're going to start making progress with PFLA, and we're also we've done savoury EOV as well. So we've got our EOV, which has been a really shout out to that. That's been all just part of our learning. We've kind of gone all out there. I wouldn't necessarily say everybody's got to do that, but I guess the key thing about that is everyone's talking about what they're doing regeneratively, what they're doing in practices. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But how do we know our land is regenerating? That's ultimately what we're saying we want to do, is we need to regenerate our land, our water cycles, our health, our mental health. And how do we know we're doing that? Just because I've put a herbal lay in, that doesn't mean that those things are happening. It means the soil health is improving in that after it's been continuous wheat for a while, but it's not necessarily regenerating. And so by doing EOVs, and we do our own using Soil Mentor as well, we're looking at our land to see, is it improving? Can we see that health of that soil is improving? And that's kind of, yeah, I've got a tangent there.
Sorry, it's good, it's good.
I'll stop.
The lady, yeah.
You talked about being able to kill out the bees at 20 months. How does that dovetail with stocking rates? Have you used more land to be able to achieve that?
So initially what we did to create a bit of space was reduced our sheep flock fairly significantly, down from 800 to 300. And that's because we had, this is where the bit on organic as well, so we've been doing fecal egg counts, we've been doing all the really good proactive management, but we found out we had resistance to yellow drenches, and as an organic farmer, you're pretty limited then. All you've got left is the orange drench, the Zolvixes, and in my head was like, well, if we get resistance to that, we're totally screwed, we won't be able to keep sheep anymore. So we took a proactive decision, we said, right, what can we do? What is it? How can we create a break of the worms in the system? The way we can do that is by creating clean grazing. How do we create clean grazing? Well, let's rest all the land from sheep for a year. So the sheep only go, they put them in one group, and they only go on each field once per 12 months. And we'll create that break. So we did do that, destocking for that reason. But now, no, we're not taking on any more land. We've maybe done a couple of things like kept the animals housed a little bit longer in the winter to allow the grass to get ahead of us, whereas previously we'd be focused on early turnout, get them out as quickly as possible and make the best of that early bite. Now we're like, let's let it fully recover before we go. But now actually we're adding stocking units to the farm, we're bringing more cattle in, and we're upping the amount of animals that we've got on the farm. So we're achieving those growth rates, but also have created capacity for bringing in a lot more animals.
Yeah.
Have you ever looked at using natural animal minces, like willow or
Yeah, so but we're quite a lot of permanent pasture. So in our herbal lays, we'll always include chicory. So when we're using those, we have a lot of willow all around the farm. So where they've got access to it, then great, and they do use it. In some instances, where we've got like a bull with a sore foot, for example, when it's like halfway through mating time, we actually go and cut some willow and take it in and let them eat it for a little bit of that kind of pain relief, aspirin type effect. So yes, we do. The challenge is getting access to it all the time so that they can like self-medicate, because every field is different.
Sorry to jump in again. Do you think you could use that as part of your rotation? You say you have a lot of riverland. Could you potentially partition off part of the field, grow willow in there, and provide them access that in spring or vital times of year to So,
Yeah. So yes and no. I think we have there's always other things going on. So our river meadows is all the breeding birds are there. So what curlews and things. So we're not allowed to plant trees down there because of that. So that restricts us. So in an ideal world, yes. Also, what we're learning is like nature doesn't do the same. So we actually where we do better is where the animals are on different parts at different times of year, responding to the year. So if we had it so that in order to get the willow, they needed to be on that part of the farm at that time, that might cause us other challenges. But definitely, in an ideal world, we've got a problem now where we've got, like everybody, hedges around the edge and nothing in the middle. And so we've got to get more shade, shelter, diversity into the middle of those fields. And actually, willow is one of the things we're looking at because lots of willow, coppice it, stick it in the ground in a wet season, and it should just grow. And so it'll provide lots of benefits as well as the kind of medicinal side of things. Yeah.
Yep.
With what, sorry?
Bricks. Yes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. They are improving. So I would say we don't do as many tests as we should, and we tend to do them on certain things where we know it's going to be really good, like on lucerne silage, and then we all go, yay, we've got amazing bricks. Are we going out on our worst permanent pastures and doing the bricks on those? Probably not. So what you've given me is a prompt to do it. But I would say we're seeing some really good bricks in some of our lays and different things, and I feel positive about that as a measure, and we want to use it more. Yeah.
So you've got lots of like
Yeah. So we're actually McDonald's of all people, would you believe, are sponsoring the data collection. So we're making the transition on our farm because we believe it's the right thing to do and we do it anyway. But how do we capture the data that we all need in order to feel confident to make these decisions? What works, what doesn't work? So we're doing that, but we're only year 2 into a 4-year project. So we just haven't. This is only our second grazing season, so we don't have any like builds to share yet. So, but we will. Yeah.
And Claire, I wonder, Caroline, do you have any thoughts on bricks levels or?
Yeah, apologies. I'm really struggling to hear actually. So I didn't hear the question and I couldn't hear much of the answer. But yeah, bricks is a great tool. I think it's just a proxy and an indicator. So I think you have to be careful not to sort of, just use that. I think like that's what I love about all the different soil mental tests. It builds a picture, and ultimately there's things that we don't yet understand that we can't quantify. But as a tool to sort of get a feel for, I love doing kind of hedgerows and plants and understanding different areas of the farm and other sort of wild areas. Then you start to build a picture of what's going on. And yeah, certainly in terms of the principle of increasing bricks, I love that concept of actually, when you get into very, very diverse swaths. I'm a big fan of native swaths, and diversity as well over maybe herbal lanes perhaps, which is not always popular, but I think there's lots of things that we don't yet understand probably about sort of the connection with native organisms with native species. So I'm a big fan of trying to bring back diversity where it's possible and practical, without the idea of any other tools. But the more we're starting to understand the science, it sort of backs up the thinking that it's a bit like sort of you can have the very productive grasses and you've got belly fill and certain things that this sort of primary nutrition that we're all focused on might not be extremely good in those species, but ultimately if you're not getting that real deep nutrition, which you only get from lots of diversity where you've got mycorrhizal networks all connected up and mobilizing nutrients to the system, then you're really just sort of feeding something that's not going to be making the health of the animals truly optimal. So I'm a big believer in, again, it's that redefining productivity thing, isn't it, where you get more, you essentially probably need nearly half as much dry matter if you've got very high bricks. So ultimately that's where we want to be heading for, focusing on recovery periods that are going to facilitate the increase in diversity is kind of usually my priority. In the first instance, and obviously if you have lots of diversity To be able to do that, you need soils that are in a higher successional state, and to be able to do that, you need to get a better balance between your bacteria and your fungi. So again, the long recovery periods and the kind of lignified material that in itself might not look particularly productive is doing a job in terms of feeding the fungi and bringing those other organisms into play so that they can then support that diversity. Because if you just sow in a very diverse sward into a low successional soil, then there's not really going to be the food web to feed itself, there initially, and perhaps that's why there's lots of different. There's never just one thing, but perhaps that's why we don't see those diverse swards sort of staying in for very long, or there's a lot of different factors at play there. But ultimately, bricks. I'm a big fan of kind of the concept of moving things up the scale of the bricks, by working with diversity rather than just focusing on individual plant species productivity.
Okay, it's 10 o'clock, so we've got to wrap up here. Thank you for your questions. Thanks for tuning in, listening. And Claire and Caroline, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll be around after. And Claire, I guess Caroline's information is on there, so you can get in contact with her if you'd like to. And enjoy your days.
Yeah.